Hi, and welcome back to the Intentional Wealth Update with Morton Brown Family Wealth. I'm Dennis Morton here with Katie Brown. Katie, how are you doing today?
Hi, great. Dennis, how are you?
Good. Today we're going to talk about the things we don't talk about often enough. We're going to talk about the soft stuff. And why are we going to talk about soft stuff?
Because it's so important to retirement, to a very successful and fulfilling retirement. It comes down to oftentimes the soft stuff more than the hard stuff, which might be the numbers and the projections and so forth. But the soft stuff, that's where it's at.
Mm-hmm. And here's the bitter truth about this is that people are more comfortable talking about the numbers or fixating on the numbers in retirement, even if they're very complex, than they are having some sometimes cringeworthy conversations about things like relationships and meaning and purpose and all that soft, fuzzy stuff that no one really wants to talk out loud about. But it really matters if you're going to be sufficiently prepared for retirement.
Yeah. Well, it requires vulnerability. There's always an aspect of putting yourself out there and being vulnerable when you talk about money. But I think it's even more so when you talk about, relationships and trying to align sometimes the values in your life with the activities that you're doing. But that's the stuff that's going to add fulfillment later on in retirement. And so putting the work into those conversations ahead of time with your spouse or with others is so instrumental in feeling like this is a purposeful retirement.
Yeah, because it really is. Retirement is the name we assign to it, but this is all about change, and the things that go away and the things that stay the same when you leave work. When you leave work, you leave that structured environment where you meet people every day, where you have social interactions. You might lose that sense of identity. I am someone who does blank.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't replace that with other places to socialize, another sense of identity of who you are, that's a long 25, 30 years ahead of you to try and navigate that.
Yeah. I love that you brought up change. We're going through a couple of different articles, just thinking through this process in advance of today's video. And one of the articles that we came across from thestreet.com, it was actually another financial planner. And she was talking about one of the large aspects in preparing for retirement is recognizing it's going to be a huge change. It could be a very positive change, but it's a process. And to figure out if you're on the same spot of the spectrum with your spouse. Once again, going back to communication, like one spouse may be just kind of contemplating the change to come, whereas the other spouse might be ready to jump into that action. And if you have misalignment there, that in itself can create some stress. So
Right.
You're right. It does come down to change and being comfortable with change and finding out where you are along that path.
And I don't think you need to be trying to get into the same season, because it may be that one spouse works longer than the other. The key is this is something that we talk about. Like, it's not a taboo conversation. Like, hey, when we sit down for that, occasional date night, let's kind of talk the hopey dreamy stuff and you make sure that that's part of the conversation and it's awareness building, right? And you dig your well before you're thirsty, so to speak.
Yeah. Something else I thought was interesting in another article with the Association for Financial Counseling and Financial Planning Education, they talked about how Americans spend more time planning vacations than they do retirement. So I think that is a tendency for a lot of couples to get to those dreamy conversations, but keep it really close hold and be like, okay, over the next year or so, what are the vacations going to look like? And you get excited about that. But the amount of time we spend on vacation compared to the amount of time we spend in retirement is so much more. So if you can take that excitement that you bring forward when you talk about vacations and try to bring that to the retirement conversation, I think that could go a long way.
It's interesting because I've started asking this question of especially new clients as they come on board. How prepared are you for the non-financial side of retirement? We're going to go through your financial plan and get the numbers where they need to be. But how prepared are you? And it's funny, some people are very honest and saying, I really don't know. Maybe I don't have hobbies. Maybe I don't exactly know where I'm going to be, what I'm going to be doing. And that's fine. That's a good awareness to have and work on. But then others don't even want to have the conversation. They just want to go right back to the performance numbers or talking about the portfolio, what the markets are going to do, those types of things. There's an aversion to that conversation. Sometimes the question is, what do you want to do or who do you want to be? But another important question is, who are you going to do it with? Because loneliness, social isolation is a really, really big issue once retirement comes, because we leave that naturally social environment of work.
Yes. And I think the answer to that is it doesn't have to be with your spouse, all the things,
Right.
or even just with your family. It can be, and it should be with a whole wide variety of people, but people that you can really work to foster and deepen relationships with so that you can show up for each one of them independently and individually, with your full self, because you're getting all different types of conversations and experiences from each of them.
Yeah, I think, and it does so much for you. One of the other things we found consistently in looking into some of the softer side of retirement is having a positive outlook is really important. And
Hmm.
we're not talking about a Pollyannish, everything's going to be great, but kind of having that earned wise optimism that things are getting going to be better and things are fine in my life, and having that. And I think being around other people is a really helpful way to do that. You kind of appreciate, you're grateful that there's just a natural chemistry that exists there. The alternative is the isolation, where you're being fed news feeds and social media, and a lot of doom scrolling happens, and you end up with a pessimistic outlook and more isolation. And that's, unfortunately, we see that happening. CNN actually earlier this summer cited a study, or kind of a collection of studies that had been put together, where over 2 million people were followed in retirement. And they said people who experienced social isolation had a 32% higher risk of dying early from any cause compared with those who weren't socially isolated. And participants who reported feeling lonely were 14% more likely to die early than those who did not. It's a real thing. It shows up in your health and your habits and everything else, but you have to start early on it.
Something I'd love to do, and maybe we'll circle back to all of our listeners at some point, but to kind of redefine retirement, because I do think that there is a modernization that is occurring, and we're seeing this more with our clients. Retirement does not necessarily mean you have to stop working or that
True.
you will stop working. Oftentimes, retirement for a number of our clients is doing exactly what they're doing, but pulling back and making it either part-time or just carving out the pieces of their professional life that they love and focusing
Right.
on those things. And I think there's a financial confidence that goes into retirement preparation, and where you get to that place where you have the freedom of time. That's ultimately what retirement
Right.
is in my mind, is that
Yes.
freedom of time. And maybe you're working, but you're doing something else and you're choosing to do that thing. Or it could be a totally different employment situation, but you're doing it because you like the camaraderie, you like the opportunity to show up and put your mind to work in a different way.
I like that you brought that point up about it's okay to work longer. There are a lot of benefits to working longer, especially if you can find things that are fruitful for you, keep your mind and your body active. I think it's important to give yourself grace. There's no right answer,
Yeah.
because work longer, work less. It's good as long as you've built up that self-awareness to say, I know who I'm going to be doing things with, who I'm living the adventure of life with. I know what things are going to keep my body, my mind active, and avoid the things that I know to be bad, like social isolation. And the ideas might not be apparent immediately. That's why we advocate starting earlier. Make this part of your planning process. If you're 10 years out from retirement, start thinking about what you think it could be like, and give it time to emerge. And you might find it through more social engagement, find out about what someone else is doing that's a great idea for you. But give yourself the time and the grace to let ideas emerge by planning far enough ahead.
Yeah, that's a good point. Don't start the conversation when you're looking at retiring in 6 months.
Yeah, I know. Well, and even then, I've noticed there's some people we've talked to about bringing them on to do financial planning, and sometimes they resist financial planning because they're on different pages on their timelines, that they're not communicating about it, and it just slams the brakes on the whole process. And I think it's fascinating that drives it more so than the numbers. The numbers, that they're willing to hold off on those just because they don't want to have this conversation.
Yeah. Create a nice environment where you guys can, you can be vulnerable with the people closest to you.
Yeah. And it's something we have to work on, bringing that vulnerability to the table, that this is a safe place where we can talk about these things. These are the conversations. This is the hard stuff that you should be able to talk with your advisor about, and lean on our resources. And there's sometimes where, There's a thing called financial therapy. There are other, resources that we can use that go beyond the scope of what we do, but might be helpful in your situation.
Dennis, I think this has been a great conversation. Hopefully we've triggered some thoughts with some people that might be listening. And as always, we welcome the opportunity to work through some of these things with clients. Before we close it out though, all the way, just a reminder, we're talking about some of the softer stuff. We do talk about some of the nuts and bolts things too. And we have our quarterly update coming up in just a couple of weeks on Thursday, October 19th. So if you guys want to mark your calendars now, we'd love to have people listen in, and we're doing a lot of things to hopefully connect in different ways, and we always welcome feedback.